So at the end of October, the chairman of Divine Peace reached out to us. The congregation had already voted to close. Their last service was November 7th. And the congregation had said, we are going to give the deed of the property over to the synod. The synod is to sell it. 80% is to go to the synod, 20% is to go to Wisco. And basically, Brian reached out to us, Brian Gutshock, a teacher at Wisco, reached out to us because he just said, you know what, this is property is going for a steal, and it would be really great if we could keep it within Wells Ministry as a Wells Ministry site. So this is all very rapidly taking place. So Divine Peace is just about 1,000 feet south of Oklahoma. So on the right-hand side of this picture is 76th Street, and on the left-hand side is 77th Street. So it goes all the way through. It's 1.18 acres, so 1 1/5 acres. The church building complex has 11,200 square feet. It was built in the year 2000. The parsonage is 1,700 square feet, built in about 1955, 5 bedrooms and 1 3/4 baths. The sanctuary seats approximately 200. There is a small narthex. This wall area right here, there's 2 very large offices that it was part of their plan to knock that wall out and expand the narthex. Someday, if we purchase the property, I would envision us doing something like that too, to make it a more functional narthex. Right now, the narthex reminds me an awful lot of what St. Paul's was back before we enlarged our narthex. The fellowship hall is probably about the size of our grace room. They had it packed in here to seat 120 people for their final service. So a good sized fellowship hall. And if Lighthouse Youth Ministry would be able to partner with us, they would use this as their part of their ministry site. It has a really nice kitchen right off of it. So they would use it Monday through Friday and available to the congregation other times. There is also a very large basement room about the same size as the fellowship hall. Right over here is a large storage room. And then behind me, as I took the picture, there are 2 large, I would call them Sunday school classrooms downstairs as well. So a lot of ministry space. There is also not only those 2 offices upstairs, but there's also a meeting room upstairs as well. And then here's a picture of the parsonage on campus that's off of 77th Street. So where is this property? Just a map. So here's 76th Street. Here's Oklahoma. So it's actually in the city of Milwaukee. This is the part of the area of Milwaukee that back when there was the residency rule for firefighters and police officers, this is an area where an awful lot of firefighters and police officers lived. Just to the north is West Allis. Just a couple of blocks to the south is Greenfield. So Milwaukee kind of slides in there. What I did is I did a mission insight study. This is a program that our synod makes available to congregations. So a 1.5 mile radius, staying within the freeway, just recognizing the freeway is kind of a natural boundary. So just 1.5 miles from the Divine Peace site, what's that area like? It's an area with about 45,000 people. Now this graph is a little deceiving because you can see that it looks like there's a huge change, but actually it's just about 600 people less over the next 10 years they're expecting. So just a little over a 1% decrease, which is not unusual for an urban inside the city kind of suburb to be seeing happen. So it's not a growing area, but a stable area. The ethnic trends here, you can see that there is a sizable Hispanic population, about 13%. That would be especially on the east side and to the north of that, in that circle of 1.5 miles. But that ratio is staying pretty much the same. There is about 8% of the families do speak Spanish in their home. So maybe this is one of the things that excites me about this is one of the mantras within Christendom today, and people who are saying, how are we going to reach people for Christ over the next generations, is how do we take back the city? That churches have tended to move out into the suburbs, and how do we take back the city, and how can our suburban churches help come back into the city? And this is just kind of like a natural stepping stone for St. Paul's to help make that happen. It's still a primarily Anglo area, but it gives us a little flavor of reaching a different culture, so that maybe this is one step and then we can do another, 5 years or 10 years down the road. So very exciting opportunity there. One of the key differences in this is the family structure. So this is the family structure around Divine Peace. So this is families with kids. You can see that just a little less than 60% are families with mom and dad present, with the kids present. A lot of single family homes, 40% are single parent homes. Compare that with Muskego. Muskego is a very stable community with lots of intact couples. Now I put them side by side so that you can appreciate them better. This too is part of this, to me, very exciting, because this gives us a chance to think in terms of how do we reach the single parent households, how do we serve them? This is sad to say, this is a direction that our society is going, and this gives us a place where we can experiment on how to serve that segment of the community. It may also be one of those things where, as some of our couples sadly go through divorce and they can't afford to stay out in the Muskego area, very often they move in towards the city where the housing is a little bit cheaper. It could be that we don't just lose those people because they've moved farther away, but we have a ministry site right near them as well. And this is another graph that just shows how the single and divorced percentage in the Divine Peace area is much larger than Muskego. So that gives us an interesting challenge. It's not just a duplicate, but it gives us a chance to think about how do we reach a different segment of our community. These next few slides are from this Mission Insight, and these are people groups that they, basically they are comparing a lot of data and saying these people who purchase and act in this way tend to think very similar. And so there are a bunch of these people groups. Now, I don't need to bore you with all the stuff about it, but there's just a couple of things I want to bring out here. First of all, this Rooted Flower Power group is 16% of the households in this area. So this is the age group 51 to 65. So these are the empty nesters. And notice right over here, length of residency. Anything to the left of the center line means it's above normal. Anything to the right of the center line means it's above normal. So below normal this direction, above normal this direction. So notice there's a big segment of the community that's been here for a long time. This people group is that way. This next people group, hardworking values, these are the 36 to 45. These are the people who have been in this area, West Allis, Greenfield, this west part of Milwaukee, this peninsula of Milwaukee into this area. They've been here basically all their lives. They've been here for 25 years, 30% of them. The same one is true of the suburban sophisticates, 11%. This is the early retirees. And again, notice they've been here forever. Now, that doesn't mean they're not mission prospects. It's just in general, you think in terms of people who are in transition are more likely perhaps looking for something in their life that's missing. So there's going to be a large segment of the people in this community that are very, very stable. But there is also a large segment of the community, 10%, this bohemian groove, 51 to 65, primarily single, in multifamily units. Look at this, how, they are very transient. In fact, this is one of the things when I talked with the pastor at Divine Peace, he talked about the transient nature of the community. This is one of the challenges of doing ministry in this area, is how do we serve singles who are not there very long, who are moving on. So that's a challenge and an opportunity to, how do we reach a different segment of our community? The same is true of singles and starters. This is what we usually think, people buy starter homes and then they move on. That's almost 10% of the households in the area. But again, notice they're not here very long and then they move out. Very few stay long-term. So what that means is they get connected and then they move. And that may work to our advantage, because what people tend to do in the Milwaukee area is they tend to move either, if they are on the north of the freeway, they tend to move to the north. If they're south of the freeway, they tend to move towards the south. People in that area tend to move out down Janesville Road, down Beloit Road, down the freeway. They may be moving into the Muskego area of outreach, so that we might be able to start our ministry with them, and then after 4 or 5 years they transition to the campus here in Muskego. So that might actually be a positive, but that's a challenge that we'll have to think about ministry here. So that leads me into what happened at Divine Peace. The church was built in 2000. The congregation is about 50 years old. Sadly, the congregation aged with its pastor. A pastor was there for 35 years. And when I talked with a pastor who was there for the last 10 years of the congregation's existence, he said, I had 75 funerals in 10 years, which is a large number of funerals for a relatively small congregation. The congregation basically aged, and his efforts couldn't change the trajectory of that congregation. One of the key things was they were unable to find a WELS niche. They're one of the WELS churches that doesn't have a school. And so what is their niche? What sets them apart from other WELS churches? They really couldn't find that niche. They were also unable to adopt new ministry ideas. It was an elderly congregation that the pastor was trying to do different things, but they really were resistant to change. And then young families came. There was nothing to set this congregation apart from where their kids were going to school, and so they transferred out. Very few families stayed there with kids in school. So what will happen I'm just calling it the Bridge at 76. This would be another place where we could conduct a bridge service in addition to our bridge service on campus. What makes ours different? Well, first of all, it's a new facility. So minor renovations for contemporary worship, but basically this facility is ready to go as soon as we are ready to go. We would bring a church planter on to develop a new core for 6 months. See, we're not expecting really any of the people who are at Divine Peace now, or had been, to be part of this new core. we're starting a new ministry there that is going to be very different from what their ministry was. So the only tie will be, oh, we love to see our church building being used, but it will be a ministry that very few of them will plug into. They'll go elsewhere. So we bring a church planter on to do the same thing that a new mission start pastor does. When the synod calls a pastor or wants to start a new mission, they call a church planter, a pastor in, and he works the field for 6 to 9 months before services start. The goal is, I want a core that will be large enough that it's sustainable when we start our services. The WELS niche would be contemporary worship not offered by area WELS churches. There is no contemporary service regularly in that area. And what we found here on our campus is the majority of people in our community like traditional, but there is a sizable portion, about a third, who like a more contemporary worship. There's probably people that we can reach with a contemporary worship language that the traditional worship languages of our WELS churches aren't. And we can work together with the area WELS churches. But this would be our WELS niche to set us apart from other WELS churches. Why are we there, kind of thing. And also community involvement. I think that's one of the things that we are very focused on here at St. Paul's, is we want to be a congregation that the community says, we know we can count on St. Paul's. And that would be our goal with this new bridge site. And that's part of the reason why I'm excited about the possibility of bringing Lighthouse onto the campus. What Lighthouse brings is a lot of community connections. They haven't done their homework yet. This is still way too early in the process, but they are very interested. I've had a number of conversations with Pastor Buskey, the head of Lighthouse. And then we have the flexibility of ministry possible with a new start. When you're dealing with an existing congregation, there is a DNA that just says, this is the way we are, and you're asking us to change too much. We can bring in, with a new start, we can bring in basically a new congregational DNA that will be more open to new ministry ideas. And then, as I mentioned, families moving to the suburbs may stay within the Bridge St. Paul's family. Then what is the timeline for the bridge at St. 76th? If we purchase the property December 12th, we would take possession early in 2022. We would hire or call a church planter to begin in April of 2022. And then monthly worship on Sunday evenings to grow the core group. And then a grand opening with Sunday morning worship on September 18th, 2022. And how do we pay for it? The purchase price, as I mentioned, how it's divided. This is Divine Peace final wishes. So the synod can't cut us a deal because they're bound by what Divine Peace said. So we will pay market value, which will bless the synod and bless the high school. But it's still an incredibly good deal when you figure we get a house that could easily be sold if we wanted to sell it for $200,000 in that area, and an 11,000 square foot piece of 11,000 square foot building. So it's a great price. And then where do we get the money? Right now we have more cash on hand than we should, and we need to find a place to invest it. And this is a safer investment than just putting it on. We would never put it out on the stock market. We can't take that kind of risk with these restricted funds, but this is a really safe investment. And if it doesn't work, the property is sold, the funds are restored. And then how do we do the ongoing finances for the bridge? The startup cost would be covered by additional offerings from the new site, grants from the Gift Trust Fund, Legacy Fund, grants from Siebert and Antioch and other foundations. This is the way we started Victory of the Lamb. Victory of the Lamb was started without any synod funds. This was started without without any budgetary funds from our congregation. So even though the bridge would be part of our congregation, I would see that this would not substantially impact our ongoing budget, that we would seek that congregation to be that site to grow, to be able to be self-supporting in the sense that the costs are offset by the offerings within a few years after the grants are used up. And then what is the organization and staffing for the bridge? We would be a congregation with 2 sites. The bridge would be offered at Muskego and 76th Street. The church planters added to St. Paul's staff to focus his attention on the ministry there, so he'd be part of the church staff. And he is part of our St. Paul's team and has St. Paul's resources to support ministry at 76th Street, worship planning, 1 worship team, kids club duplicated at the new site, preaching shared. So in other words, as we think about this church plant, because it's part of St. Paul's, we have a lot of resources as a congregation that a standalone congregation doesn't have. Many of our congregations are recognizing that and are trying to merge with different congregations. We would be able to bring so much as a support to the ministry there. So the church planter is not working out there by himself. He is part of a team. He is primarily charged with knocking on doors out there, gathering a core group, probably from the bridge to help start that group, knocking on doors, finding new people, getting to know people in the community, spending next spring and summer just becoming a face and a well-known person in that community, and then he would still have all of us supporting and helping make that happen. So this is where I'm going to stop the recording, and then there's a couple other things that I want to share and then open it up to conversation. So let me stop the recording.